Hi everyone, I'm Sanidita Diasijana with me as the first speaker of NSDC's Mansabara team. Well, ladies and gentlemen, an old legal adage says, justice will die when the law is no longer used to seek truth but to find error. Today, we are witnessing a phenomenon where the judicial stage has turned into a political circus. When a former minister is aggressively prosecuted for technical failures in a procurement policy, we are not witnessing genuine law enforcement. We are witnessing a new ruler using legal instruments to tarnish the reputation of his political opponent. Therefore, we stand with the proposition team in support of the motion that the prosecution of a high-profile former minister for policy-based procurement is purely a political tool, not a judicial pursuit. Well, before we go any further, let's limit today's debate to keep it fair and substantive through three main parameters. High-profile former ministers are defined as ex-officials who have a large electoral influence, are vocal, or represent a symbol of a past political regime. Meanwhile, policy-based procurement is large-scale procurement of goods or services that arises from macro-political discretion, such as digitalization or crisis management. In addition, political tools are defined as the use of law by exploiting the momentum of time after retirement to destroy the political capital of the figure. So we will prove that this prosecution's characterizations is legally flawed, sanctioned, and motivated by non-judicial motives. Ladies and gentlemen, let's move on to the first argument, which concerns the criminalization of public policy discretion. A minister's job is to make strategic decisions in the public interest under conditions of uncertainty. Every macroeconomic policy carries operational and administrative risks. Imperfections in implementation, such as inadequate distribution of goods, fall under state administrative law, not criminal corruption law. When law enforcement officials insist on converting violations of administrative procedures into state financial losses, the law has been misused. This is no longer a pursuit of justice, but rather an attempt to criminalize innovation. The result is that future public officials will be paralyzed by fear of creating new policies, knowing they could be imprisoned by the next regime if they are no longer in power. And then the second argument concerns the strange political timing. If these persecutions were purely legal, why does this pattern always repeat itself aggressively only after the minister steps down? Procurement occurs across all ministers every year. However, large-scale prosecutions are targeted only at specific figures who no longer have the protections of power. Legal cases are deliberately kept under wraps and then widely publicized in the media to create a public opinion platform. The goal is clear: to degrade the morals and damage the reputation of the figures, thereby rendering them politically dead. For example, the most recent case in the Chromebook procurement case by Mr. Nadiem Makarim. This policy was born during the COVID-19 pandemic crisis to address the urgency of distance learning. Mr. Nadiem made a bold decision to digitize schools in Indonesia, but look at what happened today after his retirement. The Attorney General's office charged this strategic decision as a criminal offense due to the inability of the devices to be used in several remote areas, then demanded an extraordinarily extreme sentence of 18 years in prison and a fine of trillions of rupiah. Ladies and gentlemen, this 18-year prison sentence is equivalent to the sentence for crimes against humanity or terrorism. Why is it so forced? The prosecutors themselves have struggled to prove any genuine bribery funds flowing into Mr. Nadiem Makarim's personal pockets. Sentencing an innovator for the risk of the pandemic emergency policy to dozens of years in prison demonstrates legal irregularities. This is irrefutable evidence that the law is being used as a political instrument to obliterate the minister's political legacy in the public eye. And finally, the third argument concerns the neglect of the principle of good faith. In sound state administrative law, there is a universal principle called the business judgment rule, or protection against the discretion of public officials. This principle states that an official cannot be punished for a decision they make, as long as the decision is in the public interest, within their authority, and based on good faith without any malicious intent to enrich themselves. When prosecutors criminalize policy-based procurement, as in the case of Mr. Nadiem Makarim Chromebook, they deliberately ignore this principle of good faith. Why? Because in the political arena, those in power don't need proof that bribes went into the minister's personal pockets. They only need the public narrative that the minister failed and harmed the state. By imposing technical losses on the ground as criminal corruption, the judiciary has been forced to overstep its legal bounds. The goal is no longer to save state funds, but rather to assassinate the character of figure legitimized by the judge gavel. This is a highly dangerous form of abuse of power. Well, ladies and gentlemen, let's look at the bigger picture. If we accept this motion as a purely judicial measure, we are establishing a terrible precedent where every regime change will be followed by political revenge using the judiciary. We will see an endless cycle where former ministers are degraded not because they stole public funds, but because their political choices and innovations do not align with the preference of the new rulers. When the line between policy risk and criminal corruption is deliberately blurred, the judiciary collapses and becomes a political punching bag. To safeguard our constitutional law from the interests of those in power, we strongly agree and strongly support this motion. Thank you.